You're welcome back. Now, last week, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta presented the government's budget statement and economic policy for the year 2020, a year in which elections will be held. Now, election year budgets have, often been focusing heavily on spending, but the next election year, according to the Finance Minister, will be different. Well, at least that's what he tells us. So this afternoon, we've decided to bring you some analysis of the budget and get to understand better what it means to us and how we will be affected by the government's plan. Send Ghana will help us with that. Now, before the conversation, here's a quick report filed by Philip Ankra from Send Ghana news conference.
The 2020 budget has been presented to Parliament to seek approval to spend nearly 86 billion Ghana cedis on programs and initiatives. This amount is about 21% more of what the government is likely to spend for this year. At a forum to analyze the budget, Senior Programs Officer at Send Ghana, Harriet Nuama Ajiman, said their assessment of previous year's budgets show repeated poor budget execution rate in either underspending or overspending in some specific areas.
Today we have looked at 5 areas of the budget: education, health. We have looked at social protection, agriculture, and then overall we have looked at the budget response to the SDGs. And generally what we are saying is that our budget lacks credibility in terms of execution. Comparing it to previous budgets and how we have spent those monies, government has not performed well in terms of releasing what it has allocated to the various ministries to work with. What it means is that our execution rate is either too high for some areas and too low for some other sectors. So some other sectors are not getting the resources they require to work with, whilst others are overspending. It's also about information that you put out regarding why you could not meet your revenue targets, regarding why you could not release all resources to sectors that you have promised to support. With health, we have a levy from which we generate funds for the national health insurance. It is VAT, and you and I pay for it. And then those of us in the formal sector, our social security is also taking part of it to support NHIS. Government indicates how much we are expecting from these two sources and then allocates to the national health insurance. But the allocation is short of the total it has indicated it will collect. So the question is, where is that balance going? Because the budget does not say so, and that is a transparency and credibility issue.
According to her, the government's over-reliance on foreign donor funding in some of these sectors will hinder Ghana beyond aid agenda.
If we are going beyond aid, then it means that we should be self-sufficient, we should be getting there. Overall budget, yes, we might be, but I'm saying that sectors that are still heavily relying on donors, we still really need to look at that. We have gone into agreement with Gavi to co-finance vaccines we use for immunization. Co-financing means Gavi will put part of the money on the table and government will bring its share, and then the vaccines will be supplied. Now, Gavi is supporting now, and we as a country, we are defaulting. 2016, we didn't pay. 2017, UNICEF threatened not to supply the vaccines because Gavi was not giving them money, because we had defaulted as a country. We rushed to pay. 2018, we have defaulted. This is the time for you to now look for some earmark funding from a very sustainable, domestic, sustainable source to be setting aside for your immunization, so that when your donor finally exits, we are not found wanting.
Chief Executive Officer of Send West Africa, Siafa Kamara, criticized government for over-focusing on free senior high school policy at the expense of other important sectors, especially health.
If you look at the underspending, overspending, is in education. Absolutely. One area where government underspend, one area where there is delay is in health, is in social welfare. All of those sectors that have to do, besides education, that have to do with the human condition. Water and sanitation in particular, hygiene, they pay late services to those sectors. So the health sector is really suffering. It is one area where there will be delay in the disbursement. There will be budgeted for, activities are budgeted, projects are left uncompleted for years. Okay, basic inputs are not there. They have to depend on donors. It's a misplaced priority for a country to focus on one sector, absolutely.
Philip Anker's report for JoyNews.
All right, so let's talk about it. In the studio with us, Dr. Emmanuel Eifa is Deputy Country Director for Send Ghana. It's good of you to join us, Doc. So you talk about budget credibility. Walk us through it. What exactly are the issues of budget credibility with next year's budget?
Okay, thank you, Kojo, and thank you for giving us the opportunity. And good afternoon to viewers. Send Ghana, since 2015, has been focusing on budget advocacy as one of the things that we do. Our interest is to look at how a budget translates actually into helping in our human development in general. In that thinking, our concern has been to what extent government promises to do A and B and actually gets that thing done. And so technically, this year we decided to focus on what is called budget execution or budget credibility. By budget credibility, we are looking at the extent to which approved budget by Parliament actually is executed and executed fully. Why are we interested in budget credibility? Our interest is that if budgets are not credible, if their execution rate is not to the extent to which all of us want, we think that is not really going to help in terms of delivering of public services. That actually is going to see to the benefit, especially of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. And so in looking at this year's budget, we went back into 2017 to look at to what extent 2017, 2018, 2019 budget actually has been credible. And so in looking into it, what we realized is that in all these years, we always either do underspend or overspend on the budget. And that is why we are also cautioning government that clearly looking at the projections for 2020 across sectors and looking at what we've seen in previous years, we think that we need to caution government that over the years, if you've not been credible in the sense, in terms of execution rate, then 2020 we should be careful, especially that we are going into elections. We know that there are normally election time, you have so much budget overruns. And so that is why come we focus on it to see to what extent this is an issue. And let me tell you about specific sectors. Let me first of all look at child protection and welfare. That is, for us, it is very important because children actually, we say they are the heart and the future leaders. We realize that in the Ministry of Children, Gender and Children Social Protection, there's a department called the Department of Children. But we realize that their budget, even execution rate, just for last year was very, very low. This year's allocation for the entire ministry, is about 40 million.
Right.
And from our estimate and looking at UNICEF and other estimates, what we see is that just the Department of Children alone also needs 40 million to prosecute their project. The ministry has 5 key sort of department or agencies. So if just one department, the Department of Children's budgetary allocation, it's equal to the total ministry's allocation, then that means that there's a tendency for us not to actually do well, both with the Department of Children and other departments alike.
Were you able to track how much the Department of Children were allocated last year?
Last year, I think the execution
last
rate,
budget this year, yeah.
I mean 2019, yes. I can't give you the exact absolute figure, but from my estimate, they were only able to execute about just 21% of it. So if you are able to execute just 21%, child protection and welfare is an issue. We've been hearing about teenage pregnancy. There was a report that that was put out, I think, in one of the Ghana news reports, indicated that about 7,000 and or so girls were pregnant, and for that matter, they couldn't even continue and finish their basic education. This is a child protection issue. And if the budget is not making enough allocation, and even in previous year where allocations are made and we are not able to really give the money to them to execute their mandate, then it's a worry. And that is just for children. Let me also take you back and look at issues of even right from beginning, expenditure and revenue. If you look at this year's budget, we are making a projection of around 86 billion for expenditure, and the revenue is around 67. So from the word go, there are issues, because the fact is that you need money to execute all the projects, all the expenses that we need. And in our analysis, we've shown that from 2018, 2019, the deficit has been around 19%. And there's a projected deficit of around 21%. And so even in terms of revenue and expenditure, there's some mismatch. The execution rate for revenue has also always been lower than expenditure. Execution rate of revenue has been around 86%. And that's revenue. Expenditure is around 96, 97, there about. So what clearly we are saying that, fine, we know that there's a challenge of domestic revenue mobilization. Once you don't get that one right, I mean, all other sectors are affected. So that is one key thing that we realize. My colleague Harriet, in our news briefing, I think highlighted a very important issue, which sends also to talk about credibility and transparency. That is looking at the national health insurance. 2019, our analysis revealed that around 500 million that is supposed to go to the National Health Insurance Fund was not actually allocated specifically to them. And there was no explicit explanation as to where it is going. When you talk about budget credibility, that's one other issue. Even where there are deviations, it's important that government actually explain to us as to what caused the deviation. In some instances, government do explain. In some instances, government does not. All of us know the challenges we are facing with the National Health Insurance Scheme. If the VAT law says that whatever money that actually you get from a particular sector, that money has to be given or transferred to them. And then we have 500 million last year. I mean, this year's 2019 wasn't transferred. Our investigations, our analysis in the 2020 budget also have revealed around 390 million, which there's also no explanation as to where actually it is going. We've heard news about National Health Insurance suffering, even in terms of giving certain monies to service providers. And you and I know that people have been complaining. So the fact is that if we have already low execution rate in terms of giving money to National Health Insurance, and there's some money sitting in the budget, we don't know exactly whether it's going to the health insurance, it's going somewhere. At least there has to be some explanation. That is one thing. Another, in terms of execution rate, we are looking at the water, sanitation, and hygiene. Our analysis shows that sanitation and hygiene actually is not receiving so much allocation compared to water. We are not saying that water is not important. It is very important. But to the extent that the World Health Organization and UNICEF projection shows, indeed in our Ghana, what is called multiple cluster indicator survey, 2017, that is the latest survey. We realize that 20% or so of our Ghanaian, in terms of looking at sanitation rate, that is what we see. And so that is something that we need also to look at. But the budget in terms of allocation actually allocated a very small amount to this very important sector. We are talking about making Accra the cleanest city. We always have been having challenges with respect to cholera outbreaks and whatnot. If you look at the CAPEX, the capital expenditure aspect of even that ministry, it is even worse. And so these are some of the things that we are talking about in terms of credibility issue. It is not okay just to put out projections if we know that we are not able to actually achieve it. Even sometimes confidence, it even really reduces the confidence that we ourselves have. Another thing that we are clearly pointing out is the overdependence on development partners. We are not saying that it is very bad to depend on development partners, but we've seen over the years, indeed, I've forgotten the page, I think page either 23 or so of this year's budget, the minister actually alluded to the fact that there have been delays in releases of allocations from development partners. About 29.8%, almost 30% of the allocation of monies that were promised by donors for this year has not been released. And if it's not released and we already have earmarked certain projects and programs to be undertaken with donor funding, then we need to have a second look at it. The Ghana Beyond Aid Charter, maybe let me just end this and you can. Ghana Beyond Aid Charter, actually in page 11, specifically states, this is from the government, it's not from anybody. It states that as much as possible, the country needs to wean itself from aid. And if we need to wean ourselves, if I remember, there's even a projection that by 2023, which is just about 2 or 3 years down the line, that we should as much as possible to wean ourselves from donors, at least by 10%. And then going to 2030, hopefully we should even totally wean ourselves from donors. So these are some of them, but if a chunk of our budget, especially looking at goods and services, is actually going to the way of donors funding it, then we are actually cautioning government. We are not saying that development partners are no good. I mean, we've worked with them, UNICEF and whatnot, they are helping. But we as a government, we think that government should not really just be overly reliant on them.
So like you said, I mean, that's their own agenda. They want to have a Ghana Beyond Aid. So looking through the 2020 budget, did you see any specific measures in there that are aimed at, if you like, aid substitution?
Our analysis actually focused on the social sectors at Send Ghana, because we, as our CEO of Send West pointed out in the news brief, that we are looking at the human-centered aspect of our development. And so our analysis specifically targeted the education, health, social protection, child protection, and the like. And coming back to your question, we really did not really look at specifics like NAPCO and whatnot, but of course we looked at certain government interventions. We looked at the planting for food and jobs, because that falls in line with our agenda of looking at the poor, the marginalized, especially smallholder women farmers. So we look at it in the context of broadly looking at the agriculture sector budget. What we realized is that last year we actually made recommendations to government that government should try as much as to include more women, smallholder farmers, because we realized in our analysis that they were not considered. But frankly, and we saw it in the budget, that government has actually tried to enroll more women and small-scale farmers on board. But we are also calling for government to also look at, tie in with the LEAP beneficiary. LEAP, it's one of the interventions to also at least help the poor. And so in cases where some able-bodied people can even work, we're thinking that government should also look at that. We also look at issue of fertilizer and input distribution in that area. You know that the planning for food and jobs thrives on fertilizer, because that's one thing that government is using. But we also have heard in recent times that smuggling of certain inputs, including fertilizer. So government might be making effort, but if you don't put mechanism in place to make sure that some of these things are curtailed, then you might be doing planning for food and jobs, but then so much also is going to be lost. Right. So that is what I could say briefly about that aspect as well.
I want to say a big thank you to you for coming in and helping us wade through some of these issues. And of course, Doc is from Send Ghana.